I've been stationed at a lot of places the public will never hear about, but there's only one assignment that still wakes me up drenched in sweat, one location I pray stays buried under dirt, concrete, and memory, an abandoned military bunker carved into a mountain range so remote even most enlisted personnel didn't know it existed. They called it Site Echo 7, but among those who had spent more than a couple nights guarding that dead steel door, it had a different name, the Hole. No one knew when it was built. Some said late 60s, Cold War paranoia era. Others claimed it was older, dating back to experimental programs that never made it into official archives. All I knew was that it was never meant to be opened again. The bunker was sealed after an internal containment failure, which is military code for something went catastrophically wrong and we're never acknowledging it happened. For years, Echo 7 sat dormant, untouched, forgotten. But that changed the night my team was ordered to unseal it. We weren't told why. We weren't given context. Just coordinates, access codes, and instructions that made my stomach twist: secure, assess, and extract any surviving data or biological samples. Biological samples from a bunker that hadn't been opened in decades. Yeah. That was the first red flag. We arrived just after dusk. Cold, wet air clung to the mountain, and fog rolled through the pines like it had a mind of its own. The bunker entrance was a massive blast door covered in rust so thick it flaked off like old scabs. It looked like the world had done everything it could to swallow the place. My team consisted of 6 people: myself, Sergeant Willis, Corporal Drew, Specialist Harper, and 2 analysts from an agency I'm not allowed to name. They didn't wear uniforms, didn't share their background, and didn't talk unless they had to. The only thing they made clear was that we were to follow their instructions exactly, no questions. When we entered the codes, the door made a sound I'll never forget, a deep metallic howl like the mountain itself was groaning in warning. It took nearly 5 minutes for the mechanisms to grind open, releasing a gust of stale, chemical-tinged air that smelled like rot and ozone. The 2 analysts exchanged a look I couldn't decipher, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. That was red flag number 2. Inside, the bunker was a maze of reinforced hallways, peeling paint, and flickering emergency lights that shouldn't have been working after so many years. The deeper we went, the colder it got. Not natural cold, mechanical cold, like some old system was still functioning without power. Our footsteps echoed too loudly, like the hallways were larger than they appeared, like something unseen stretched beyond the flashlight beams. We found the first signs that something had gone wrong in a narrow corridor lined with observation windows. Behind the glass were small containment rooms, each with rusted restraints bolted to the walls. Some had deep gouge marks, as if something with claws, or hands strong enough to mimic claws, had scraped violently at the steel. One room had dried, dark stains smeared across the glass. Blood? Harper whispered. The analyst simply said, not exactly. That was red flag number 3. We reached the central chamber about an hour in. It was a circular room with a sunken pit in the center and consoles arranged around the walls. Everything was dead except for a single screen glowing with faint green lines scrolling slowly like a heartbeat monitor on low battery. The pit was surrounded by heavy metal grates and reinforced supports, all cracked or bent outward. Something had broken out, not in. The analysts got to work immediately, plugging into the consoles and downloading data while we patrolled the room. I kept glancing at the pit even though I didn't want to. There was something inside it. Something large, covered with tar-like residue, but not human. Or maybe it had been human once. Before whatever happened to the people assigned here. Before whatever they were trying to contain broke them. The longer I stared, the more my skin crawled. It wasn't dead. I could feel that. Not moving, not breathing, but not dead. One of the analysts finally spoke. We need to access sub-level 3. Willis nearly laughed. There are barely 2 levels here that aren't collapsing. There is no sub-level 3. The analyst stared at him like he was the idiot. Echo 7 wasn't built on 2 levels. It was built on 5. Only 3 were ever mapped. We need the unlisted ones. Red flag number 4, and at this point, I wanted to walk out, seal the door, and pretend nothing inside had ever touched the air. But orders were orders, and Echo 7 wasn't done with us yet. We found the access elevator hidden behind a false supply closet. The panel was dead, but the analysts had protocols, and tools, we weren't supposed to see. Within minutes, the elevator screeched to life and began its descent. The ride down was long enough that all of us silently questioned how far the bunker actually went. When the doors opened, everything was pitch black. No lights. No sound. Just a stale, suffocating silence. The air felt wrong, like it was thicker, heavier, like it held weight. Harper switched on his flashlight, and I swear to God, the beam didn't travel normally. It felt swallowed, absorbed by the darkness instead of cutting through it. We moved cautiously. Sub-level 3 looked nothing like the levels above. It wasn't military gray or industrial steel. The walls were lined with strange, organic-looking structures that pulsed faintly with leftover bioluminescence, like veins under skin. The analysts walked faster, more purposeful now. They knew what they were looking for. We didn't. That was the worst part. We were armed but blind. They reached a sealed laboratory door covered in warnings I'd never seen before: containment breach class black, sensory hazard, zero visibility threat. Whatever they had locked in that room, they weren't supposed to see, or hear. The analysts bypassed the lock and the door hissed open. Cold air poured out, colder than the mountain snow outside. Inside was a long chamber with shattered tanks, dangling wires, and scattered notes frozen in time. Something had torn through the lab violently. Glass crunched under our boots as we scanned the area. Harper lifted a notebook and read a fragment aloud. Subject no longer responds to light. Subject adapting. Subject learning speech patterns. He swallowed hard. Learning speech patterns of who? The answer came seconds later. A voice echoed from deeper inside the chamber. A voice that sounded like, me. Sergeant? You shouldn't be here. My blood froze. Everyone turned toward the darkness at the far end of the lab. The analysts didn't run. They didn't panic. They raised their scanners and whispered, "It survived." A shape shifted in the shadows. The voice repeated, mimicking my tone perfectly. "You shouldn't be here." Then it laughed. Not a human laugh. A hollow, layered sound like multiple voices stitched together. Willis aimed his weapon. "Identify yourself." The voice shifted instantly, now mimicking Willis perfectly. "Identify yourself," it mocked, then it stepped into the flashlight beams. To this day, I can't fully describe it. Our brains aren't built to process things that aren't supposed to exist. It looked human at first glance. Arms, legs, torso, but the proportions were wrong, like someone had reconstructed a person from memory but got all the measurements slightly off. Its skin was pale and stretched, almost translucent, like it hadn't seen real light in decades. But the face was changing constantly, flickering between ours, copying us, studying us, stitching together features that didn't belong on one head. As if it was trying to decide what face it should wear permanently, the analysts whispered to each other frantically. One said, "It shouldn't be awake." The other said, "Containment protocols failed the moment the door opened." That's when the creature spoke again, this time using Harper's voice, then Drew's, then mine, all layered, all wrong. "We remember you," it said. "We remember your kind. The ones who fed us. The ones who listened. The ones who screamed." My chest tightened. Something clicked in my memory. The bunker wasn't abandoned because of a breach. It was abandoned because they couldn't kill what was inside. Whatever Echo 7 had been experimenting on, had survived every attempt to destroy it. The analysts panicked. "Retreat now," one shouted. The creature moved. Fast. Too fast. It crawled across the ceiling, bones cracking, limbs contorting like it had no fixed skeletal frame. Willis fired a burst, 3 rounds that hit center mass. But the creature didn't react. It just dropped behind him silently, balancing on its backward bent limbs like a spider wearing a human suit. Before Willis could turn, it whispered his name in his own voice and slashed across his vest, sending him sprawling. Then the lights died. Total darkness swallowed us. And in that darkness, the creature whispered every one of our names, perfectly mimicking our voices, sometimes overlapping them, sometimes whispering from multiple directions at once. It didn't just mimic sound, it mimicked proximity. It made itself sound like it was behind me, then beside me, then inches from my ear. I felt something cold brush my neck, and it whispered, in my mother's voice, "Come here, baby." We fired blindly, pulling back toward the elevator, dragging Willis who was bleeding heavily. The analyst stayed behind, shouting instructions none of us could hear clearly. One screamed, "It learns through sound." Stop talking. The other yelled, don't let it touch, and then choked mid-sentence. We didn't see what happened to them. We just heard a wet crunch and a sound like bones being pulled apart. Harper vomited mid-run but kept moving. Drew started crying silently. I focused on the elevator, praying the power hadn't failed completely. Somehow, miraculously, the panel lit up the moment we reached it. We shoved Willis inside and slammed the emergency seal. As the doors closed, the creature let out a sound that still makes my skin crawl, a perfect imitation of Willis begging for help, even though the real Willis was unconscious at our feet. The creature was still learning, still adapting, still becoming something new. The ride up felt endless. We didn't talk. We didn't breathe. When the doors opened onto level 1, we sprinted through the hallways toward the exit. But something was wrong. The bunker sounded different, like the structure itself was groaning or breathing. Emergency lights flickered violently, casting the walls in stuttering shadows that moved when we didn't. When we reached the main blast door, it was already sliding shut. Automatically, something had triggered the emergency reseal protocol. Harper screamed and squeezed through the narrowing gap. Drew shoved Willis's stretcher through and dove after it. I made it out last, hitting the dirt as the door slammed behind me with a thunderous boom. We didn't wait. We ran down the mountain path until our lungs burned, stopping only when we were sure the bunker, the hole, was sealed again. We radioed command, but the response was immediate and terrifying. Echo 7 is under quarantine. Do not speak of what occurred. Do not return. Do not approach the structure again. The next morning, the entire mountain was declared off-limits. Satellite feeds were cut. Road access was blocked. And by evening, explosive charges shook the valley as the military collapsed the entrance and buried Echo 7 under a landslide of steel and rock. But we heard something before the mountain sealed it forever. Something echoing from deep inside the bunker. A voice. A perfect imitation of mine. You shouldn't have left me. They say Echo 7 was destroyed. They say whatever was inside died under the mountain. But if that were true, explain this. 2 months after the incident, my radio crackled with static while I was alone on night patrol at a completely different base. Then a familiar voice whispered, in my exact tone, Sergeant. I found you. And I pray to God the mountain holds. Because if the creature escaped that bunker, if it learned more, changed more, evolved more, then Echo 7 wasn't abandoned. It was a warning. A warning we ignored. A warning we sealed too late. And a warning that might already be walking among us wearing a voice it stole from someone who should have never opened that door.